Please.
Thank you very much for kind introduction about me. It's easily seen my work is very hard against the audience. By the way, my sound goes to the rear of the audience. Can you hear me? Okay. First of all, I would like to begin the epidemiology of the patent foramen ovale. And the prevalence of patent foramen ovale, PFO, is 44% to 66% in patients with cryptogenic stroke. However, in autopsy series of all-cause deaths, its prevalence is 27. And this higher prevalence in the cryptogenic strokes suggests that some of the cryptogenic strokes with PFO as reason for the stroke is paradoxical embolism. On the other hand, the most of the patients maybe have an incidental PFO, so it's not necessary to close it. A few years ago, it's very interesting paper were published in stroke. In this paper, there is an interesting formula. Probability of PFO is incidental in cryptogenic stroke or not. They include 23 case control studies in which 1,154 cases with cryptogenic strokes, of which over 400 had a PFO. But in controls, in 1,852, of which only almost 200 had a PFO. If you put these numbers in this formula, you can see a strong association between cryptogenic stroke and PFO was observed in especially young patients with a higher odds ratio at 5.1. And the proportion of patients with PFO ranged from 30% to 70% among cases. However, in the control subjects, it ranged from the 0 to 33%. That means, they concluded, about 1/3 of PFO discovered in patients with cryptogenic stroke are likely to be incidental and unrelated to the stroke. But on the other hand, 2/3 of PFO discovered in patients with cryptogenic strokes are probably likely to related to the stroke. And look at the etiology because of the PFO. It's very clear, paradoxical embolus. If a patient had a stroke and coincidentally with a pulmonary embolus, or visualized thrombus crossing the intra-arterial septum, the pathogenesis of stroke is clearly paradoxical embolism. Otherwise, if a patient with stroke and large PFO only, or large shunts, or Eustachian valves, and silent brain infarcts, paradoxical embolism may be a cause, but not a clear cause. Very recent paper, Taylor et al. And his colleagues in the Stroke Journal, they examined whether specific neuroradiological findings are associated with PFO among subjects with cryptogenic stroke. They analyzed the risk of paradoxical embolism study database of subjects and on their cryptogenic stroke and non-PFO status in order to find association between PFO and first index stroke seen on imaging, second index stroke size, third index stroke location, fourth index multiple index strokes, and last one is prior stroke or baseline imaging. They also compared with proposed high-risk echocardiotic features. What they found, the number of the subject is very high, 2,068, were significantly more likely to have a PFO if their stroke was large, with 1.3 odds ratio. If the ear stroke seen on imaging, odds ratio is also 1.5, and the ear stroke superficially located. Otherwise, a prior stroke on baseline imaging was associated with not having a PFO. This is a very strong association, negative association also. And finding multiple index strokes or no echocardiographic variables were not related to PFO status. To this slide, I would like to give a briefing. Approximately 2/3 of PFOs discovered in patients with cryptogenic strokes are likely to be related to stroke. Patients with stroke occurs coincidentally with a pulmonary embolus, and patients with visualized thrombus crossing the intraarterial septums. Large PFOs and large shunts, the association with Eustachian valves and patients with pulmonary embolus, if they had silent brain infarcts on imaging. And finally, large radiological appearing, superficially located or unassociated with prior radiological infarcts were more likely to be PFO associated. So we cannot close our eyes to the reality of the PFO. So we needed to treatment. However, there is a debate. Maybe in the next future, treatable or not. If the PFO is more benign, we don't need treatment. However, we try to treatment it. Surgical therapy is the invasive nature, and there are several risks of perioperative complications. We have no large data about this procedure, and also after surgical treatment, ischemic event recurrence is higher, up to 7%. What about medical therapy? The optimal medical therapy for prevention of recurrent cryptogenic stroke is really unknown. And the best medical treatment, antiplatelet versus anticoagulant, remains controversial, also is a matter of the debate. And both medical treatments are reported to be associated with recurrent events after a cryptogenic stroke, especially with medical treatment, annual stroke or TIA recurrence rates of up to 11%. The last chance procedure is transcatheter closure versus medical therapy. And look at the very recent paper. This is a very extensive review. They analyzed 39 studies with over than 8,000 patients with transcatheter closure, and 19 studies with more than 2,000 patients with medical therapy, but separately. As you can see in the transcatheter closure, the recurrent neurological event rate is 0.7. And in medical treatment group, this is the 4.3. This is the percent for one per patient per year for recurrent neurological events. In this paper, there are another studies, 10 studies. They used 2 treatment modalities over 1,800 patients. Look at the results of these studies. In overall size effect is forward transcatheter closure. 0.25 favors the transcatheter closure. Again, I would like to give a briefing. Meta-analysis of the small number of the comparative studies and the meta-regression analysis indicated that there may be a significant benefit in reduction of recurrent neurological events with the transcatheter closure in comparison with the medical therapy alone. Now we'll look at the very fast randomized trials. The previous ones is observational trials. Now we are going to investigate randomized trial. The first one is Closure 1, a multicenter randomized, however, open-label trial of the device, Closure with a percutaneous device, Starflex, as compared to with medical therapy alone. They calculate the power of the study about 900. Also, they included the same patients in the trial. And their primary composite endpoint of a reduction, ischemic events and mortality at 2 years. In the device arm, only the 6% of the patients, almost 6 patients, and in the medical treatment arm is 7.7. There is no significant difference between two medical treatment arms. And their result does not demonstrate a benefit of PFO closure with the Starflex device compared with the medical therapy. This is a paper published in the New England of Journal of Medicine in last year. But there are several comments against this trial. 2 trials was ongoing and ended a few weeks ago. I think it's published in the beginning of the March in the New England Journal of Medicine. One of this PC trial. This is a multi-center superiority trial in 29 centers with patients patent foramen ovale and ischemic stroke, TIA, or peripheral thromboembolic event. The primary endpoint was similar, and mean duration of follow-up is a little bit longer than the observational ones. It's 4 years in both treatment group. And the results of this trial, 204 patients in 7 patients in 204 patients in the closure group and in 11 patients of the 210 patients in the medical treatment groups. The hazard ratio for closure versus medical treatment is 0.62. This is not a significant difference. Therefore, they concluded the closure of a patent foramen ovale for secondary prevention of cryptogenic embolism did not result in a significant reduction in the risk of recurrent embolic events or death as compared with medical treatment. The next ongoing trial is ended, and at the same time, RESPECT trial. This is a prospective, multicenter, and randomized trial. Their patient number is a little bit higher, and power is more, over 980 patients at 69 sites. The medical treatment group received more or more antiplatelet medication. In the primary intention to treat analysis, there was no significant benefits associated with closure. However, closure was superior to medical treatment alone in pre-specified per protocol and as treated analysis with a low rate of associated risk. Last year, another interesting paper published in Clinical Research Cardiology journal. In this paper, they took the follow-up time very long. Among 5,000 transesophageal echocardiographic in stroke or TIA patients between 1988 and 1997, APFO was found and considered as possible mediator for the neurological events in only 97 patients, and only 66 patients is available for follow-up for 15 years. In the first 4 years, 13 patients suffered from recurrent ischemic events. However, the risk of recurrence was increased over the entire length of the mean follow-up period, and they concluded in patients with paradoxical embolism, recurrent ischemic events are frequent despite medical treatment. When you give a long follow-up time, for example, no matter how old I am, for example, 45, if I have PFO and today I have a ischemic attack, that means if you follow me 4 years, 10 years, 15 years, if you follow me only 45 years, you can define ischemic attack maybe related to PFO. This is very amazing. In conclusion, percutaneous PFO closure is a minimally invasive procedure which can be performed with high success and low morbidity in general. Randomized studies show a consistent pattern in favor of percutaneous PFO closure. However, according to randomized studies, percutaneous PFO closure appears to be clinically at least as effective, but not superior to medical treatment. The best medical treatment, antiplatelet versus anticoagulant, remains controversial, and the risk of recurrence was increased over the entire length of mean follow-up periods. I say at least, not all, but at least patients with multiple embolic events warrant percutaneous PFO closure, especially if they already failed medical treatment. Thank you very much for your attention.